Thank you for joining me, everyone. For those who do not know me yet, I am Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans, and I stumbled ass backwards into mindfulness and insight meditation in 1998 during a time when I was suffering from clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder, which had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house or work. I was on short-term disability, couldn't go past the front door without melting down. And was fortunate enough to be paired up with a psychologist who, even back then, was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me some of these techniques as a way of working with my issues. I was not thrilled with his suggestion. My thinking was, my life has effectively stopped. I can't do anything but sit in my apartment and panic all day. And here's this guy saying, let's watch the breathing for a while. Right? Okay. He didn't give me anything else, and I was sitting at home all day anyway. And I figured, okay, I'm going to try this just long enough so I can honestly go back to him and say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And it's been, I don't know, what year is it now? It's been almost 2.5 decades since then, and I haven't had that conversation with him yet. And now I'm teaching this stuff myself. So I'm just about at the point where I'm ready to admit there might be something to it. So what I want to talk about today is what I call the biggest bitch of the human experience. And, I'm starting to record some of these and share them out on YouTube and Patreon and so forth. I realize it's going to be a little difficult maybe to publicize some of these. So you may see this one come out as, say, the biggest annoyance of the human condition. Might get watered down a little bit in the title, but whether we call it a bitch, whether we call it an annoyance, to me, this is the biggest stumbling block that we have as humans. And the reason I refer to it as the biggest is because it kind of gives birth to all the other ones. For example, in Buddhism, what the Buddha taught was, how do we alleviate our own suffering? Not pain. We don't have a choice about pain, but how we deal with pain determines whether or not we experience suffering on top of that pain. If we don't deal with it skillfully, we find all these ways of trying to get rid of it that end up causing more problems for us in the long run, right? That's why we end up in this human condition. And what the Buddha talked about were the 3 main sources of human suffering, which are greed, hatred, and delusion. I want this, give me more of that. I don't want that, get that thing away from me. And we're always kind of on this hamster wheel running towards stuff and running away from stuff. And it all comes out of this delusion. And we don't have time to get into that whole ball of wax. But the point is, the delusion is what ultimately paves the way for the greed and the hatred. The gimme this, the don't gimme this identification with these things that we want, that we fear, and so forth. It allows those things to arise. So delusion is kind of the mother, if you will. And what I want to talk about today as being this biggest bitch or this biggest annoyance of the human condition, I think of it as being the biggest one because it's also kind of the mother of the rest of them, in my view. So what am I talking about? Some of you are probably familiar with Pema Chodron. She's a fantastic teacher. Check out her books. They're amazing. She has this wonderful quote. I think it opens up one of her books. It might be Places That Scare You, one of those books. I think it's like the very first line. It says, as a species, we should never underestimate our low tolerance for discomfort. Amazing, amazing line. And something that I've certainly seen in myself, and I am not at all unique in this respect. Over the course of my practice, I've discovered, okay, I say I'm, seeking happiness. I think I'm seeking happiness. We all talk about, I want to be happy. If I get that thing, I'll be happy. I want to be happy, 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 happy. Do we really seek happiness? I mean, are we actually going after happiness? Are we acting in a way that will lead to our happiness? Not usually. Not usually. Usually what we're doing is we're trying to achieve comfort. We're trying to achieve comfort, not happiness. And why are we doing this? Discomfort to us signals danger. I talk a lot about the evolutionary aspects of why this practice of meditation, mindfulness, insight, why these are effective. Our ancestors on the proverbial African savanna, discomfort for them usually meant saber-toothed tiger, usually meant some kind of deadly weather pattern, meant no food, meant enemy tribe. So there's this evolutionary root to discomfort equals danger. But discomfort also accompanies what? Growth. Growth. To me, the biggest bitch, or the biggest annoyance, or the biggest stumbling block, or the biggest hindrance of the human condition, the one that really sets the groundwork for all the other ones, is that any kind of significant growth, which necessarily includes elements of change and uncertainty, effectively triggers our danger sense, our fight or flight response. And we don't make the distinction between what is a genuine threat, fight or flight response and a growth fight or flight response. Because did our ancestors really have that? No. I mean, when they had a fight or flight response, there was mortal danger. There wasn't really this distinction. Today, it's not like that. Today, growth experiences can be public speaking. It can be starting a new job. It could be something involving a relationship. Most of our fight or flight responses today, for most of us, are not a response to a mortal threat. But we are still hardwired to react to them in that way. So anytime we want to engage in something that would actually help us grow and develop, we have to deal with this autonomic reaction that says, you might die. And this is part of our human condition. So running towards comfort, when we're seeking comfort instead of actual happiness, when we mistake those two, running towards comfort means that we are running from growth. And that is not sustainable. I certainly found that for myself. When I bottomed out, it was because I was attempting to feel comfort that was becoming increasingly elusive because of my anxiety and my depression and my panic. And I didn't become agoraphobic overnight. I didn't wake up one morning and say, I can't leave the house. It was a gradual transition as I kept moving more and more inward, trying to stay within a comfort zone that was getting ever smaller because I kept going more towards its center, and it just kept shrinking around me. So I found firsthand that it's not sustainable to seek comfort exclusively, because eventually it just runs out. My comfort zone eventually became the bedroom of my apartment, and then not even really that. So I needed to find a way to work with that. And that's what I want to talk about here, is how do we work? Because we're not going to get rid of this per se. And trying to get rid of it is exactly what I was trying to do. Trying to get rid of feelings of discomfort. Ironically, it just increased it. It just made it worse. So I want to talk a little bit about an early insight that I had around this, which is, what is comfort? I'm very left-brained. I'm, very logical. So when I start to work on a problem, I think about, okay, how can I define this? What sort of box can I put this in? And, how does this system work, right? And the first thing I usually start with when there's something that I can't quite get around as well. Okay, let me define this a little bit. Let me try and gain at least some intellectual clarity, so I have some idea of where to look to start developing some emotional clarity, some psychological clarity, some physical clarity. And I realized early on that comfort wasn't something I could really define. I had this very profound early experience because when I started working with this, I realized, okay, I can't just continue this vicious cycle of trying to move ever inward and trying to find comfort. That has tapped out. That's not working. So I had to start learning how to get out of the house again. And literally started by walking around the block one time. It took about 30 seconds, but scared the hell out of me. But kind of started there. And then moved to like 2 blocks. And then moved to 3 blocks. This is over the course of like a couple of weeks, okay? And then there was this one day. There was a particular thing that I needed to do that day. And it involved walking about 7 or 8 blocks away from my apartment. I had not walked 7 or 8 blocks. I hadn't been 7 or 8 blocks away from my apartment in, several months at this point. And I made that walk, and it was horrifying, particularly once I got about 4 or 5 blocks from the house. I was like, okay, if I lose my shit now, I can't get back in time. I'm out of the safety zone here. And I made that walk, and I got there. Did what I needed to do. Went back to my apartment, got inside, sat down on the couch, and was like, oh, just this sudden release. And it was in that moment that I realized comfort's not a thing. Comfort is just an experience we have after discomfort. There is no comfort without discomfort. It's all part of a continuous process. How we feel about something, we feel about it in relation to what came before it. So if all we're doing is seeking comfort, you can't continue to just get more and more and more comfort. It doesn't work that way. It's not a fixed thing. It's a process. Our comfort zone isn't static. It's not something that we can sustain in a fixed state. Whatever position you're sitting in right now, maybe it feels very comfortable. What if you sit in it for the next 4 hours without moving? Probably not so much. How about those people that win the lottery and they're delirious? For how long? Does it last? No. This gets to the roots of what the Buddha was talking about with dissatisfaction. We experience dissatisfaction. It's another part of our human condition. And that gets into, how do we work with that kind of pain? Dissatisfaction is a discomfort. It's a pain. We don't have a choice. It arises. It simply does. So our comfort zone as part of this process, in my experience, is always either shrinking or expanding. Always. So in Buddhist terminology, how do we skillfully work with a comfort zone? Skillfully meaning in a way that does not cause us suffering. How do we work with this dissatisfaction or pain or discomfort in a way that doesn't make things worse? May not completely eradicate it. Might. May not. Doesn't have to. Doesn't have to. That's not necessary. The line of thinking that says, I must get rid of this, that's a suffering line of thinking. That's putting a condition on. Things have to be this way for me to be okay. to be comfortable, to be happy. That's never worked out for me, and it's not what the Buddha taught. How do we skillfully work with discomfort? I tell this story a lot about a sociology teacher when I was in college who gave us an assignment, and I won't get into the whole story. Some of you have heard it several times by now. But the upshot of the story is she was giving us an assignment that, for many of us, made us feel uncomfortable. And when she gave us the assignment, she said to us, some of you may feel uncomfortable with this assignment. And it wasn't anything bad. I mean, she was asking us to go to a public AA meeting and take notes. So it's not anything, doesn't do anything wrong. But some of us felt uncomfortable about it. We've never been to an AA meeting. Are we invading? Like, what's going on? She says to us, some of you may feel uncomfortable with this assignment. And I felt very relieved, like, okay, she's going to give us an alternative or something. Some of you may feel very uncomfortable with this assignment. You have every right to. That's fine. That's fine. What? So she made it very clear, you're doing the assignment, may feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. Blew my mind. Now, this is several years before I started, mindfulness practice or anything. It's okay to experience discomfort. I'd never had it put to me quite that way before. Usually it's like, oh, something is uncomfortable. What do I do? How do I get rid of it? How do we make this stop? Shoot first, ask questions later. No. You can feel discomfort and that's okay. Well, holy shit. Huh. So one of the things that we can do in this practice is begin opening to the idea of discomfort being here. Even if we're not necessarily ready to open to discomfort itself, what about just opening to the idea of being open at some point to experiencing discomfort just as it presents itself? Even that in itself can be uncomfortable, and that counts. Now, there is some good news here. What I have found is, as we have experiences like the one I described, where I had to walk those 7 blocks and then came back and was like, oh, this relief, comfort, finally felt some comfort after months, and discovering, oh, okay, this is what comes after facing some discomfort. As we do this, the act, the process of facing discomfort, of working with discomfort, feeling discomfort, mentally, emotionally, physically, that becomes a rewarding experience in a twisted sort of way. Because we start to make that association, we start to see again and again, oh, okay, when I go through this difficult process of growth, it's a growth process, right? Then I get to enjoy some comfort afterwards, some relief afterwards. And I've also gained some experience in working with that difficult thing. For those of you who practice yoga, you'll know this is some of what we do on a yoga mat. I practice a very intense, heated power yoga. And one of the things that we're doing, and one of the reasons I enjoy it, and one of the reasons it is so helpful for me, given my background, is when you're in a room that's 100+ degrees and you've been holding some pose for, a couple of minutes, 45 minutes into class, your system's on fire. And what we're doing is triggering our fight or flight response in a controlled, safe environment. We are feeling the experience of, hey, danger. But we know there isn't actual danger. And we're making some room to explore what those feelings, what those sensations, what those thoughts, what those storylines around it are like. But we don't have to be on a yoga mat in a 100-degree room dripping with sweat to do that. We can do that just on the meditation cushion. Because just sitting on the cushion with the challenge of being present, genuinely present with our feelings as they are, you can find plenty of discomfort there too, right? Remember, I call my practice mindfulness in blue jeans. This isn't sitting on a mountaintop with a gorgeous sunset and a bowl of kale and everything's harmony. No, this is a blue collar practice. There are some pleasant parts. There are some unpleasant parts. We're here to learn about ourselves. We're here to see all the things. We're going to get a little dirty sometimes. But whether we're talking about a 7-block walk for an agoraphobic, whether we're talking about a 100-degree yoga mat, whether we're talking about sitting on a meditation cushion or taking our practice out into the world, all of these techniques count. And they count because they're all really boiling down to the same question, which is, am I gonna be okay? Am I gonna be okay? And as we begin to sit with that question and observe the processes and the feelings that come up around that question, as we take actions in our lives, like some of the ones I've described, that help us to expand our comfort zone, more of the uncomfortable things outside of the comfort zone start to fall within the comfort zone. I picture it kind of like an amoeba, one of those little things. It's they kind of growing out, and as it grows out, stuff just kind of. And I'm not a science guy. I don't know if an amoeba grows. Someone's going to correct me. I have no idea. Just imagine one of those things that one of those little cells that imagine just kind of. The comfort zone just kind of grows. And these things that were once outside of the comfort zone, I'm not saying they necessarily will feel pleasant, but we start to recognize, oh, okay, not a mortal threat. Something that I can observe and it's safe. It's okay. Unpleasant, but observable. And not permanent. Something's always going to follow it. And in my experience, the harder it is to be with that initial experience, the better it usually ends up feeling afterwards. And then you also get to have that nice sort of, okay, been there, done that feeling with it. Oh yes, I have faced that. I can face that again. It's now making its way into a comfort zone. One of my favorite quotes is, every problem contains its own solution. And this is kind of one of those. Just genuinely opening to discomfort itself brings the ability to have discomfort come into our comfort zone. Very paradoxical. Being with discomfort brings discomfort into our comfort zone. So we really start to reverse the exact cycle I was talking about earlier on that left me housebound. So to kind of bring it home between discomfort, growth, happiness, rather than having to choose between comfort and growth, every experience of discomfort is actually an opportunity for growth. Even if that growth is just the ability to manage the discomfort or to change our relationship with the discomfort, our perspective of the discomfort, our storylines around the discomfort. Every moment of discomfort brings with it the opportunity to learn how to simply be with it in a way so that we, in the words of the Buddha, don't cause our own suffering. So, why don't we take a few minutes and do some practice with this? I have a few more things that I want to mention about it, but I'm going to do that in the course of the sitting, because there are a couple of other things that are very important about this so that we do this in a way that is healthy for us. If you are seated, please have your hips elevated higher than your knees, if at all possible. It's helpful for your posture as well as your breathing. If you can't do that right now, not a big deal, something to keep in mind for the future. Let's begin, as we always do, by imagining that we are suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of our head, as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension. If you feel any tension in the body right now, that's absolutely fine. That's a form of discomfort, isn't it? And we're not here to argue with it or to try to force it away. This is a learning process, an opening process, a making space process. So as we sit suspended from the ceiling, if we notice any tension, we simply notice that there's tension. And if we don't notice any tension, we don't notice any tension. I also like to make note of what is in contact with the chair or the floor, so that there's this sense of grounding. We're being supported by something, and we can allow it to support us. Let's take a moment and notice that feeling of grounding at the bottom, and a gentle lift at the top, and whatever happens to be in between at the moment. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. You may notice as you bring your attention to your breathing, you may begin to shape or control your breathing. We don't need to do that here. We may have a concept of what our meditative breath is supposed to be. Something deep and long and contemplative, right? Not here. Our meditative breath is simply the breath that we notice as we observe. We simply see the quality of it, whether it's long or short, or deep or shallow. If you're like me and have been controlling your breathing for a very long time, as I was during the years that I was dealing with panic and anxiety, you may find that you're not sure how to allow the breathing to simply be as it is, or maybe you don't want to. I didn't want to at first. It's very scary. And if you notice that, then just notice that. No need to argue with it. No need to fight with it. If there's controlling and shaping, notice there's controlling and shaping. Either way, what is the quality of the breathing right now? Not quality in terms of good or bad, just quality in terms of long, short, deep, shallow. And you may also start to notice another quality. Is the breathing comfortable or uncomfortable? Physically? Psychologically? One of my early issues with not controlling the breathing was feeling like I wasn't going to get enough air in. That was a very difficult thing to sit with. And then over time, I noticed, I have this thought about the breathing, this fear. I'm not going to get in enough air. I'm going to pass out. I'm going to die. But geez, I keep sitting and I keep seeing that, and I'm still here. Still here. And the sensations that arose around that went from feeling like a mortal threat to making their way into my comfort zone. Still uncomfortable, but a discomfort that was allowed. An example of finding comfort in the discomfort. Let's observe the quality of the breathing for a couple of minutes. And one of the challenges in a meditation practice, and especially when we're working with something uncomfortable, is maintaining our focus on the breathing. Because it's very easy to slip into the storylines around the discomfort. At some point, we do notice that we've fallen into a storyline, and when we do, we simply come back. You might even notice that you may feel some discomfort around realizing that you've fallen into a storyline, right? Oh, I shouldn't be doing that. I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm terrible at this. I'm no good at that. You know what that is? Just another storyline. And what do? We notice that. And we come back again. That's all part of the process. Again, ironically, paradoxically, the discomfort that might arise around that process is another opportunity to just work with that discomfort. The problem contains its solution again and again and again. Now, I'd like to point out that the kinds of discomfort we're working with here can be relatively subtle. Working with discomfort doesn't mean it has to be this overwhelming agony. We don't need to take that on, and shouldn't take that on as a first step. That would be counterproductive in most cases. We can just start with small instances of discomfort. A classic one with meditation. Boredom, restlessness. That thought of, I could be getting this other thing done instead of just sitting here, right? I'm a type A personality. I get it. And you probably could go just get that other thing done. But man, isn't it kind of a red flag that you can't just sit for 15 minutes without getting so agitated? Is there maybe something more to be gained by exploring that discomfort rather than just hopping on that hamster wheel in reaction to it, blindly following it? Trying over and over and over again to finally get to that place where there won't be discomfort anymore, as if that exists? I never found it. Not for lack of trying. So we can start small. Just with what's here right now. Discomfort, even if you're not noticing any right now, it'll arise at some point. Again, sit in the same position for 3 hours, see what happens. So as we do this, something to be mindful of. Am I doing this in a healthy way? Am I skillfully pushing up against the edge of my comfort zone? Or am I trying to do too much too fast? And that's going to be different for all of us, and it's going to be different for each of us at different times. And it's going to be easy and tempting sometimes to try to fool ourselves into giving ourselves the answer that we want. But one of the benefits of this practice is that it clears away a lot of the muck that gets in the way of that little inner voice. The one that always tells the truth. The one that knows. Listen for that one. Let's take a couple of minutes and anchor on the breathing, and you may expand your attention into something that might be announcing itself. Perhaps a discomfort somewhere in the body. Perhaps a recurring thought, feeling. And we just notice that physical or psychological sensation as the process that it is. Anchoring on the breathing, watching it, feeling it, not trying to change it. Letting it be as it is. Now, patience and self-compassion are critical parts of this process. There's an old saying in spiritual circles, it's kind of romanticized. It says, the only way out is through. And yeah, that's usually true. Yeah, I'll give you that. There's a piece I like to add at the end. The only way out is through, but you don't have to do it all at once. As my own teacher is fond of saying, don't make yourself sick getting healthy. For some of us, the discomfort, the pain, the fear, these things come from trauma. the roots of my anxiety, depression, panic came from a traumatic experience. So we need to work with those things with great care. In this process of making space, of sitting and observing discomfort without judgment or reaction, or simply noticing the judgments and reactions as they arise without judging or reacting to them, this whole process is extensible, meaning as we sit with what we're experiencing right now on a chair or a cushion, well, it doesn't stay on the chair or cushion when we leave. Our ability to make space for feelings, processes of discomfort here and now stays with us when we go out into the world. And over time, as we encounter challenges out in the world, work and relationships, well, the feelings of discomfort we have out there are really the same ones that we have right now, aren't they? They all come down to that one question that, am I going to be okay? So as we sit and work with this, with the right effort, with ardency, we get better at working with discomfort and more uncomfortable things. And that translates into being able to do that quite naturally because it's become habitual off of the cushion. This is how we achieve everything that the Buddha dedicated his teaching life to, alleviating our own suffering. Not on a mountaintop, not on a beach, standing in line, stuck in traffic, taking the opportunity that this annoyance of the human condition is offering us. We can move into some discussion. Hi, Lane.
Yep. Hi. So one of the things that struck me today, honestly, for the first time, is that my automatic default action when there's pain is to attempt to do something to avoid the suffering. So that might be jump in and try and do something to stop the problem from happening. That's definitely a default for me. To call somebody and vent so that I'll feel better, to reach in my bag of gummies and take one because for a while I'm going to be able to process things really well. And so one of the things that really struck me today was the idea that for me, something to work on and think about is pain suffering, that in between I have this pain avoidance suffering. And I have to really think about how do I stop the avoiding part, because that's what prevents me from just sitting with the problem. Does that make sense?
There's definitely an important distinction here. I'm glad you raised the question. Pain is pain, discomfort, however we want to refer to it. I mean, it is a signal of something that it needs to be addressed in some way. Now, in some cases, the way of addressing it could very well be taking some kind of action. If talking to somebody, venting to a friend there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If we're feeling a particular pain and need some kind of medication for it, of course we do that. What we're talking about here in these cases I can kind of divide it into one of two categories, which is either a pain or discomfort that can't be completely avoided, eradicated, what have you, and then we run into suffering when we try to do things to completely eradicate it, like in the case of someone who is, self-medicating to the point of being completely numb. Is that, or those cases where there's a discomfort, as I was mentioning early on, where it's, well, okay, this is uncomfortable, but there's growth here. This is a growth discomfort. This is something that, as my first teacher, the psychologist, once said, comfort isn't always what's required. So there are times when discomfort is quite necessary. As I discovered when I found out the relationship between, okay, what is comfort? Oh, it's the thing after discomfort. We need discomfort. But some of our suffering arises when we don't realize that. That's some of the delusion the Buddha was talking about, this literal ignorance. We are unaware of, oh, wait a minute, this sort of pain or discomfort is not just good, it's downright necessary. So we need to delineate between, okay, is this pain or discomfort something that will be most skillfully handled by a medication or a venting or this, that, or the other thing? Or is this something that, no, this needs to just be observed for a while? I need to really understand what this feels like. Or, no, this is a discomfort that does require action, but this action actually means I need to move towards the discomfort. That's where this practice becomes very important, is we develop our powers of discernment so that we can more accurately see, okay, which category is this falling into? And that will help us see what the most skillful action is in that case. Thank you for that. Cheers. Hi, Steven.
Hey, how's it going, Ron?
Good. How's it going?
Not too bad. Thanks for the doing this. Yeah, I can kind of relate to that just because I'm reading a book now on, I think it's like acceptance and commitment therapy, and there's something similar to that about delineating between those two kinds of concerns. Like, what they try to describe is that like it's wholly, entirely rational to try to like solve pains like outside of you and stuff like that. Like if you have a broken leg or even if someone else is in pain, it's naturally, I want to fix this. And it's like, that's a totally natural discernment. But like when it comes to like emotional, interpersonal stuff that doesn't have like necessarily a logical like formula to it or whatever, it just can't be like deduced by like science or something like that. Like that's when it becomes like, okay, now you probably have to sit with this. And that's where you have to go through the experiential pain. And it's like, like that's what they talk about, experiential pain. Like avoiding experiential pain is just, it makes the whole thing problematic. It just keeps growing upon itself. Like an elastic band, it just snaps back even harder. No, so I'm just saying I related to that a lot because I'm still trying to figure that out.
Particularly in Western society, there's this, I think one of the things I said earlier was shoot first, ask questions later. It's like, okay, there's a problem here, fix the damn thing. Now, yesterday. We're not real good with the whole experiential thing. We chase after the experiences we want. We run from the ones we don't. Again, this is all straight out of the Buddhist handbook, right? One of the things I mentioned is, comfort isn't a thing. It's a process. All of these things are a process. All these things that I tend to talk about, whether it's anxiety or happiness or depression or dread or comfort, they're all processes. They're all processes. They all wax and wane, whatever terminology you want to use. And it is the exact process of feeling that if you get a cold is a process. Your immune system kicks in and you feel like shit and the whole thing. And then eventually it has to process and work its way out. I mean, what if it didn't? Well, you would die from the cold. This is all the same thing. We need to process whatever these things are and where they're coming from. And that can be frustrating in the sense that not only do we, okay, so you're telling me I have to sit with discomfort, but, well, how long? How long do I have to sit with this discomfort? Well, I don't know. And, is it going to get worse? Maybe. But it's that exact process in itself that has to take place in order for us to grow and move on. And yeah, that's a hard thing. That's a lot of uncertainty. And what does that do? That triggers that danger sense. And it's like, well, no, that's not acceptable. I think one of the things you said was acceptance. And that's one of the things that we start to work on here is like, well, is it really not acceptable? Like that head explode moment I had in that sociology class. You may feel uncomfortable with this. That's fine. Oh, so this is allowed then. These sensations are allowed. They suck. They're scary. But they can be here. And that's good because they kind of have to be. We don't really have a choice. We have a choice whether to accept it or work with it. We don't have a choice about whether they're actually going to be in there somewhere. They're already there. So yeah, that's rich, fertile territory you're working with. And I'm there with you, by the way. I'm there with you. I'm not looking on down from above. I'm next to you. Cheers for sharing that, man.
Thank you. I just had another question. Do you think it's important to understand where your trauma comes from specifically? Like, or is that something like you said you had a specific event? Like I have some specific things as well, but I didn't know if it was necessarily like important to really like understand that before you do like go further into this, or is it just like that's something that's elicited maybe later on or something?
You started my answer for me with the elicited. Yeah, it's one of those things that for some of us, it's something that we'll have all kinds of knowledge and understanding about before we ever start actually processing it as, part of a meditation practice or in some other way. Some of us may not even realize the stuff was stemming from a trauma until it starts to announce itself after a practice has started. It's really going to be quite different for everyone. The way I think of it is this, and this kind of dovetails into what we were saying a moment ago. knowing about it and understanding it from an intellectual or historical standpoint, I would say is a necessary but not a sufficient component. I understood mine quite well for 8 years and slowly destroyed myself, still avoiding and denying and distracting. So I'm living, walking proof of the fact that simply knowing about it and understanding it, that's not going to do the thing. It's helpful. It can be helpful. But the experiential piece is wholly necessary. For me, having the knowledge, the intellectual understanding is very helpful. But we often fall into the trap of trying to make that be enough. And that is not the case. So that's what I would say it's helpful if not necessary, but definitely not sufficient.
Thanks.
Cheers. I'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hope to see you all again real soon. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.